So I want to talk to you guys about a guy called Dmitry Rogozin. Now, Dmitry Rogozin, before we get into what he said and its impact on on the Western view of the war, or what we think of the Russian occupation, Dmitry Rogozin is known for a few things, but he's a semi-high-ranking Russian government suit. He is somebody who, in fact, was the head of the Russian version of NASA for basically a decade. He was a Russian ambassador to NATO from 2008 to 2011. He was in charge of elements of the defense industry. He is serving as deputy prime minister. He has been around and around and around and around. Now, Dmitry Rogozin is also now, as of 2023, the occupation senator representing occupied Zaporozhia. Now, for those of you who are unaware, this is the Russian occupied territory that is held in Zaporizhia. I'm saying it both to be as diverse and lib-pilled as possible. So this territory here has to be governed by some authority, since it has been annexed by the Russians, and since it's technically part of Russia now under the Russian constitution, even if it's not recognized by basically any other country in the world, they therefore have to treat it like Russia, which also means that they have to put in government officials. Now, that doesn't mean they treat it completely the same. Obviously, it's much closer to the front line. It's an occupied territory of a foreign country that has a lot of people in it that despise them. There's, for example, executive orders that have been written up by Vladimir Putin that allows the Russian president to seize the property of people in occupied territories if they do not accept Russian citizenship. Obviously, private property rights is not something that you can take and give away so quickly to somebody in Moscow or somebody in St. Petersburg. But that is the case to somebody living in Mariupol, which has a high population of people who are not happy with the occupation, which just so happens to be right dab smack in the middle of the occupied Zaporizhia region. Now, if you see, the biggest city in this region is still not occupied. And the Russians, according to their demands, want to take the rest of it. They still want to take the city of Zaporizhia. They still consider it a Russian city. A lot of the population there speaks Russian. I know people there that speak Russian. They don't want to be part of Russia, but they speak Russian. And so they consider it, definitely since they've already annexed the Oblast officially, even if they don't control all of it, they would still, if they could, like to take it. So don't only think about this as, constrained to occupied territory that's currently occupied and could be constrained to it in perpetuity into the future, depending on how the borders of this war is drawn up afterwards. But also think about how this could affect the unoccupied territories that Russia still wants to go in and take if they are able to. Just something to think about. Anyway, Dmitry Rogozin is the senator here. He was appointed the senator here. And after he was appointed the senator here, he started to show, well, not for the first time, but showed publicly some of his old roots. Because then he posted some stuff online about his beliefs as the person who's supposed to be representing occupied Ukrainians. Here's one thing he posted. Before his illness, U.S. Defense Secretary, I'm not going to click the images for TOS reasons, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin loved being photographed with pygmies. And so then they have a picture of a gorilla next to two African men with spears who had presumably killed the gorilla that is now strung up, next to a picture of Lloyd Austin, of course calling Lloyd Austin a black man, a gorilla. This is the senator the Russian government thought should be in charge of occupied territory as a senator, to be their representative. When those in occupied territory look up above them for who represents me in Moscow, who tells the elites miles and miles and miles away how us in these frontline areas are doing. This is where we're at. This is where we're at. Okay. Well, that's not where he ended it. After a good 24 hours of people dragging him around for this, and him getting community noted, Rogozin's post is completely racist. By the way, can I just say, I have never, ever seen a reader added context on Twitter that was just like, they're racist. Because if you had to give added context for every tweet on Twitter at this point in the Elon era that is racist, it's going to be like every other tweet in the For You section at the very least. Anyway, comparing Lloyd Austin to a gorilla. The only question is why Twitter hasn't suspended his account for such a clear violation of their terms of service. Damn. Damn. It might be because the government, I mean, not the government, the Twitter administration does seem to have some belief that you allow government officials to continue to post even if they violate TOS because it's important for documentation purposes. This is the people of influence. Anyway, Rogozin didn't stop. He kept going. And then he posted this video saying monkeys because people were angry with him comparing a gorilla to the American Secretary of Defense, who's a black man. He replied to this after people got angry saying monkeys should be called monkeys and showed footage of Ukrainians dancing, then monkeys dancing, Ukrainians dancing, and then monkeys dancing. So this is not only, of course, calling the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Lloyd Austin, a gorilla, but it's also calling the people that he's supposed to be representing, mind you, monkeys, dehumanizing them, degrading them. This would be like me. I love Maryland. I live in Maryland. This would be like me, me dehumanizing Marylanders as their senator. Say actively degrading them, saying that they're less than human, they're like animals. To use this type of just horrible, acidic type rhetoric. And he's doing it publicly on Twitter. Still up. In fact, this post of him calling Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin a gorilla has been up for 2 days. There's no Russian government officials message him saying, hey, take it down. Mind you, this guy was the head of the Russian version of NASA for a fucking decade. This is the depths of the Russian space program's head's knowledge. Look at the 19th century style racism for the Russian space program. Now, I want you to think for a moment. If this is what he's willing to say publicly, if this is what he's willing not only say publicly, but then double down on publicly to make sure he adds dehumanization targeting the people he's supposed to represent, what do you think he does when the cameras aren't on? What do you think he does and says when there isn't any cameras or isn't any, microphones in the room? How do you think if he views his own people like this, or what's supposed to be his own people, it's supposed to be the people he represents, how do you think he treats them? And how do you think he would treat them if the Russians were to get that land permanently or expand their holdings? This is something that needs to be talked about, because I really don't think that a lot of people have reckoned with the fact that there is going to be a material difference between living in an occupied city and a non-occupied city. We already saw the standard of living decrease in occupied territories over the 8 years preceding the big Russian invasion of 2022. We already saw the dividing lines between families, people losing their property, people losing their homes, people losing their churches. It was absolutely awful. But if you are stuck there for any number of reasons, maybe you couldn't pay the $3,000 to $5,000 to have basically a mule smuggle you out of the area. Maybe you didn't have the connections in order to get out. Maybe you don't have enough money not only to pay for a smuggler, but all of your money is tied up in your local property, and all you've got is that little home that has been passed down in your family for generations in occupied territory. Maybe you've seen all the videos online of trucks and cars and everything exploding. You've heard local rumors, either from the propaganda circuit or just from, word of mouth at the barber or wherever, that it's too dangerous to flee. I know people that when the Russians were advancing on Kiev that were staying in their homes because they knew other cars were getting blown up as they tried to go for it, and they're just too scared to leave. And maybe, of course, there are people who are waiters, which do exist. But for those of whom who identify as Ukrainians, for those of who we all saw this was Ukrainian territory, like 2 years ago, and is still recognized as such, filled with people who are not happy with the occupation, being treated this way by the person meant to represent them. This is an old style occupation. This is an old style occupation where you point people not best suited to smooth over the edges with those in occupied territory, but you pick those most likely to instill fear and obedience in occupied territory.
But Dylan, aren't we humans just monkeys with less hair? On a serious note, holy shit, Batman, racist much?
Yeah, no, this is, I mean, look, thank you for the $5. After all of the like mocking the United States for racism, I mean, I already talked, you know, Americans already know like, oh, the Europeans attack us for racism. Well, then you talk about the Romani community for 5 seconds. Oh my God. But I mean, when you talk about like the Soviet Union or how Russian diplomats treated American diplomats when it came to the issue of racism, like, it is true that we have massive issues in the United States with racism, but that isn't due to a lack of racism in Russia, as we can see today. Obviously, the Soviet Union played by slightly different ideological principles than today's Russia, but that racism didn't just disappear in the decades of the Soviet Union. And the stuff that this guy believes, and this is what I want to end with, because this is the thing that really gets me, is this guy that we're talking about right here. Remember, he's installed in territory that was invaded in large part according to those who, you know, sent these troops over there to die, to denazify the countryside. Now, if you look up Dmitry Rogozin, you know, I'll just skip the whole like shebang of me trying to find a specific thing. Dmitry Rogozin, Nazi. You know, let's just skip that. Let's skip it. Let's skip it. Yes. Yes, he has a history of Nazism. Yes, the Russian installed senator in occupied Zaporizhia that they invaded in order to denazify is a Nazi. Yes. So not only is he just, I mean, like, oh, he's a racist and a Nazi. Like, you know, these two things kind of overlap. But yeah, no, this isn't something that just completely like came out of nowhere. This is a belief that he's held probably towards black people and minorities and Ukrainians ever since the early 1990s, maybe even before. And so the grand irony of all this is not only that Russia has invaded Ukraine using, back since 2014, neo-Nazi militias like Rusich in order to engage in their anti-Nazi campaign, but they have now replaced the non-Nazi senator that represented Zaporizhia with a Nazi senator in the name of denazification. Eastern European politics of the 21st century, everyone.